Welcome to another episode of the Enterprise GTM Podcast, your essential guide to cracking the enterprise market and building a business that lasts. In this episode, we're digging into how AI is transforming e commerce with two amazing guests who've built some remarkable products leveraging cutting edge AI in e commerce. We start with how far we've come from the recommendation systems of the previous 2 decades. Then we discuss how the new wave of AI technologies makes hyper personalization possible. We dig into some of the key challenges that builders and technologists face as they leverage AI for these cool and challenging use cases. There's a lot to learn today, so let's get right into it. Good morning, Samir, Anu. Really excited to have you both here and very, very excited to jump into this conversation. Welcome to the Enterprise GTM Podcast.
Thanks, Vidya.
All
Thank you
right.
for having us.
Thank you. All right. To start with, let's get into a quick intro for the folks that don't know Samir. Samir is widely regarded as a world leader in machine learning and natural language processing. He's been a pioneer in several areas, including adversarial robustness, interpretability, and reliability of NLP models. Samir has received more than 45,000 citations to date, and his work has received several Best Paper awards at top tier conferences. He's currently on leave from being a professor of computer science at the University of California at Irvine. Samir was also an Allen Fellow at the Allen Institute of AI. He's worked at amazing places like Google, Microsoft Research, and Samir is currently Chief Technology Officer at a venture-backed startup called Spiffy. Samir, welcome. You've done some incredible work in your career. So we wanted to start with, your current endeavor, Spiffy. Could you tell us a little bit about what is Spiffy doing and why does it matter to customers?
Cool. Yeah, happy to do that. So at Spiffy, what we're doing is fundamentally rethinking how AI can approach e-commerce and essentially transform that whole space. I think there are a lot of existing systems that sort of build chatbots on top of existing AI layers. But what we're doing that's very different is we're building dedicated AI models for each of our customers, for each of the merchants. You should imagine having sort of an AI model that's looking into your catalog, learning it inside out about what you have, understanding your brand voice, understanding what specific sort of legal and other compliance needs you have, and then eventually engage with your customers on multiple fronts, exactly how you would want it to. So we've been, by training these sort of specific models for each of our customers, we can deliver really amazing experiences that are low latency and accurate and eliminate hallucinations and a bunch of these problems that AI models have right now. So that's sort of what we're building at Spiffy.
Awesome, awesome. Just to double click a bit about what about the way that Spiffy is doing this for customers is important. Could you tell us a bit more about like the customer experience before and after Spiffy?
So if you imagine what retail experience is like right now. You go to a website and the website is basically the same for every user that comes in. When you start engaging, maybe some recommendations change a bit, but if you're searching for something, the models, the underlying algorithms basically give the same result to everyone. All the pages look the same. The whole experience is same to the extent that it doesn't feel very personal. And if somebody comes to a website to purchase something, they usually have a need, or even if they don't know exactly the product, they have a certain desire that they want to hone into a single product. And nothing in the experience right now is really helping the users through that journey. They have to do all of the work. So what we are building is on every level, ultimately, of the e-commerce experience, rethinking what it means for AI to come in and take over what that experience could be. So when I go to a e-commerce website versus if one of you go to it, we are different people. We have different needs, even at the time we visit, and there is no reason why our experience should be the same. So what we are building in right now and we deploy to our customer is a shopping assistant in some sense that allows you to express what your actual needs are and really targets what products would address those needs and help you come to a decision that makes sense for you. That's how we're approaching e-commerce. And we really stress on understanding our consumer and getting to their need, because I feel like when I even look at the history of internet as it has evolved, it's getting a lot more personal, a lot more targeted. And this is sort of our next version of it, is to use AI to really help understand what consumer wants and get them to the product that they want to buy.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to where we are today, which is the use of LLMs for personalized product recommendations, right? We all like famously have heard about Netflix and their original, like the competition for coming up with algorithms for personalized movie recommendations and so on. So could you like, just given how long you've been in this space, looking at all kinds of different things before LLMs even started becoming relevant for this, Samir, could you tell us a little bit about what was state of the art as it relates to product recommendations in e-commerce settings before LLMs came on board?
Yeah, so if you think about recommendation systems, and I'm sort of summarizing very rich and diverse set of methods and
Sure.
simplifying them, but essentially a lot of them rely on the signal of, okay, if you bought this one item and a bunch of other users bought the same item, what else did they buy that I can sort of put in front of you? That is a really powerful signal. That's one of the lessons we learned from looking at Amazon, looking at Netflix, and how sometimes magical the recommendations seem to be, is because how strong that signal can be. We are at a very base level, there are a lot of similarities that we can put our consumers into, like these bins, and those bins can have accurate recommendations, but it only goes so far. And we all have our own experiences of how recommendations at some point stop being very useful, and you're just clicking next, 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 and trying to find something you need. It just doesn't make sense and sometimes takes away from the experience. Part of the reason is that it doesn't really understand what the product is. Most of the recommendation systems sort of use it as product ID essentially to build recommendations off of, and it doesn't really understand the user's need. And so, what we're building and what LLMs allow you to do is really spend time with the product descriptions to understand, okay, what is this product actually doing, right? And then, if you think about it as a catalog, there are multiple products, and you will see many products have very similar product descriptions. And so, an LLM can actually spend time understanding, okay, what actually makes these things different from each other. And with multimodal LLMs coming up as well, you can imagine a visual component to it also, that they may have descriptions that are not available in the text itself. Hey, I want something that's sparkly, and that may not be in the description, but might be evident in the images. And so LLM allow you to sort of extract all of this data out and sort of build a really rich source of information. But on the consumer side, if you have the right experience, and if you have the consumer's trust, they will tell you exactly what they need. And we've had multiple customers where the consumers are extremely open about what their needs are, because that's what they're shopping. They want to buy something for a specific use. And using that information from the consumer and the information that we've got from the product catalog and from images, and combining that with the traditional collaborative filtering system, gives you an experience that's a lot more targeted and personalized, and in a few clicks gets you to the product you would want to probably purchase.
So, Samir, if I paraphrase my understanding of what you said, it seemed like what was state of the art before the emergence of LLMs for this problem of product recommendation, it seemed to be relying more on a more static set of what retailers thought of as user preferences, interests, maybe observed behaviors within a certain cohort mapped by a static set of attributes that describe product attributes. And then the mapping using techniques such as collaborative filtering or others, they led to a certain set of recommendations. But what I'm hearing is that with the emergence of large language models, and be it the implementation of a chatbot, you're able to iteratively ask a customer while they're in the process of making that selection, you're able to get clarification of intent. And then with the enhanced understanding that LLMs bring, both of products and the user, you're able to make better personalized recommendations. Is that a fair characterization of what are able to do in this category?
Yes, that's a great summary of how LLMs come in. And I will mention that these aspirations were always there in recommendation systems. So if you go back, you will see a bunch of work that looks at the text of the product and tries to incorporate it, or tries to find some information about the user and tries to match it up in some. In hindsight, it looks a lot more heuristic, essentially. But yeah, so I think that these aspirations were always there, and LLMs have allowed us to unlock all of that and actually build systems that come across as introspective about the recommendations much more than before.
And what are some challenges I know it's early days at Spiffy, but what are some challenges that you can talk about in leveraging these more state of the art methods using LLMs to power personalized recommendations?
There are lots of challenges. I think the one that we were somewhat surprised about, but maybe again in hindsight we shouldn't have been, just there is a general tendency of a certain attitude against AI. And so there are a certain set of consumers who sort of go into the experience assuming that it's not going to work or assuming that it's going to fail. And partly that's because there are enough experiences out there that don't give them very useful experience. And so when you're starting from something like that, you have to give them a good reason to engage, and sort of communicating that and communicating the value to say, like, look, we're not promising everything. We're not promising AGI here or anything like that. What we're going to help you is with the shopping journey, and let's go on this together. Just communicating that from a product point of view was a bit of a challenge, I will say. And I think the other challenge that we are addressing is that we kind of didn't realize how unique each merchant is, how unique each demographic of the merchants are, and how there are very specific needs that each merchant has towards brand voice, towards how they want to engage with their consumers, but even sort of from a compliance and like what can they say about competitors, what can they say about their own products. All of them, they have very different needs. And yeah, that became sort of a focal point of our company.
Awesome. We'll come back to that later. Would love to double click on that too. But before we do that, let's move to Anu. So Anu Trivedi is the head of Flipkart R&D. And Flipkart, for our audience who may not be familiar with what Flipkart is, it's actually India's largest e-commerce marketplace with customer base of over 600 million. And in the 10 years since Flipkart's inception, they offer over 80 million products across 80 plus categories, including things like smartphones, books, consumer electronics, fashion, lifestyle, you name it. And Anu is managing a global team of data scientists, engineers, product managers, and she and her team have developed and managed GenAI products for a wide variety of use cases that span search, recommendation, customer support, seller experience, product marketing, content generation, and so much more. So, Anu, you have such a breadth of experience here, and also at the massive scale, it sounds like at Flipkart, 600 million customer base. I don't know of too many companies that can boast that. So, tell us a little bit about your experience shipping GenAI projects. What are some of the more complex use cases for LLMs that you have used? Could you unpack for us some of the challenges and the journey here?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you, Vidya, for having me over in this conversation with Sameer. Right, it's fascinating to learn more about Spiffy and how they're driving the change. Being a retailer, right, it's still a technology-first company because of its scale. So we were always on the cutting edge of technology application before even the advent of generative AI and the LLMs, right? But this new technology has given e-commerce the needed boost, as Samir was mentioning, right, to drive the consumer behavior change. Whatever e-commerce have always tried for is basically get as close as possible to the shopping assistant physically present in the brick and mortar stores. And with that LLM being there, right, we are basically trying to get as close as possible to personalized shopping agent to understand our user behaviors and drive the consumer behavior change. It's not an easy fit, to be very honest. When we first started, right, we have been trying. So in e-commerce, right, if I have to basically redefine the places where you can apply all these AI applications, it's everywhere. So the major cost to the business is essentially driving the supply as close as possible to the demand. So understanding the consumer needs and then basically figuring out if we have the right supply and the right demand balance. So not only just managing the demand side of the story is important, it's also extremely important to manage the marketplace. How to basically figure out what demand is basically happening, the trends which are happening, restock it in the actual warehouse so that at the end of the day, you can drive the business towards a positive growth. So the applications of LLM actually brings this whole story closer together So we have been applying not only, creating personalized shopping assistance, customer, assistance on the consumer side, but bringing the generative AI story into the marketplace side to, you know, reduce this gap between the two sides. So that's where all the learnings have been, just handling the consumer side of the story is one part, managing the supply and the demand, and how to basically cater towards a changing consumer behavior is another part, which needs to be told as well to make e-commerce successful.
Got it. This is fascinating. So, bringing the supply and demand closer, clearly, especially at the scale that you did do at Flipkart, there are so many moving parts on both sides. And also with LLMs being applicable in, like you said, pretty much everywhere, I'm sure you've had to pick, like, where do you go first? Where do you go second? Where do you go third? And then I'm sure you probably encountered some challenges, perhaps, in some of these use cases, and also maybe a lot more bang for the buck for some of them. So could you like maybe tell us a little bit about how did you go about figuring out? I think you've talked to me, I mean, when we chatted one-on-one, you talked about customer service, one of those cost centers, if you will. I mean, pick whatever use case is most relevant here, but curious to hear what are some of the most complex use cases where you used LLMs?
It's very, very task specific, right? Flipkart being, what should I say, a group of companies. We have travel, we have e-commerce, we have hyperlocal minutes, we have UPI payment systems. So it's completely business driven, right? So the type of challenges which we get in hyperlocal, where it's very, very personalized down to the zip code, it's a very, very different way to apply generative AI compared to the customer support, where we would basically focus on more on the self-serve than going to the human agent, right? So it depends, it varies from business to business. But in general, right, if I am to talk about the challenges of LLM, it has always been trying to make it more latency efficient, right? So the more complex the models, more complex the data. Samir talked about, the catalog data usage, right? Product descriptions, reviews. The more data you pack, what we saw when we first started, this is the early days I'm talking about, right? And we were benchmarking SLMs, LLMs, and stuff. We saw that if you're passing 1,200 tokens, input and output combined, drastically the latency drops. And consumers are ruthless, right? Especially in a very competitive market like a growing in India, right? They will not wait more than a second to get the answer out, right? So it's very hard to type a question, understand the intent, get a huge catalog index, and basically get the top three products, summarize, and get it out. It's just not possible today by all of this within a second. LLMs are complex and large models. However much GPU you are throwing at it, it's just not possible for them to basically handle it. Doing customized SLMs, yes, it's basically getting us within the latency reach, but then you're sacrificing on the accuracy and the human-like nature of the understanding and the context switch, which essentially happens in a personalized shopping space. There is immense amount of intent switch which is happening from one place to the other, like compared to like payments to then offers, like whatever you can think of, search and all the follow-ups, the complex follow-ups, right? It's a very, very hard place to figure out the latency and the cost efficiency and figure out where are the places you want to bring the LLMs. For example, agents are something which people are raving about all the way. I can tell you there are very few places in e-commerce. I mean, e-commerce can benefit a lot from agents, but there are very few places where you can actually go and deploy agents in real time in e-commerce because of the latency requirements and the cost requirements. It just does not make any business ROI sense to basically go with that. So yeah, I mean, LLM space is great and it's evolving out. It's very nuanced in what you can actually bring to production versus what kind of actual cutting edge research is happening.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, some fascinating observations here. I mean, all the way from dousing all the rage over agents to how for every use case, you have to really evaluate what makes the most sense. I picked up on three key dimensions here, Anu, based on what you said in terms of how you evaluated what makes the most sense from the solution domain to the problem domain. It seems like obviously there's latency, accuracy, and cost. If I were to oversimplify some of the key things that you have to make trade offs on. And when it comes to especially Flipkart and the scale at which you are doing these things, how did you, going from prototype to production, could you walk us through how did you actually like make some decisions in terms of like, okay, this works in prototype, but obviously prototype and production, I'm sure for you, there's a huge, humongous gap. How did you actually like test out what would work in production? Did you have like a subset, a
It's
big
all A/B driven. It's always all
A/B
A/B
test driven?
driven in e-commerce. Yeah. So especially in 0 to 1 products like this, right? So we have a product called Flippy, which is a personalized shopping assistant. I could compare it to Rufus, but Rufus is not exactly like that. It's trying to go towards that, right? And one of the major problems which e-commerce suffers from is the dynamically changing catalog, right? Especially zip code wise and location wise. You can basically take out and hash three top products according to three features, but it might not be available from the zip code one person is querying. So it's basically, it does not matter. You have to do everything, in real time. So some of the things, some of the hypotheses that we create, I'll take the customer support use case which we were talking about, right? Evals are the key, right? So how are you kind of measuring success? And there are two types of evals of the story which I always like to describe, right? Which is, one is your model based, the DS metric evals, right? Where you are basically trying to measure the success of the model. Another is the product based evals, right? Your product metrics, which you're actually trying to target. Sometimes it's very hard to match the two because it's all happening in real time over a large session. So you have to create some offline approximation of these evals. Some of the things which we came up with and patented are called answerability of conversation assistant. How well over a session can it basically answer all the questions? Even if you answer all the questions well, it might be the case the customer just do not like it. For example, the customer is trying to return something. And every question answer, the LLM is basically doing a perfect down to the T job, taking things from the SOP and answering and structuring all the answers correctly. And a very successful session, we did resolution resolve, but they kind of give us a thumbs down. So it's very important to figure out, what are the metrics you're following and why, an analysis of why it is happening. So AI observability is the key piece. AI observability is something, if you do not have it, otherwise, in this situation, I would have basically then gone back to data science and say, hey, keep on improving your models. But that's not the case. The user is just not aligned with the policy, and that's why they give me a thumbs down. If my product is basically pushing, I need more thumbs down, or I need more monthly engagements, people are not engaging because you have bad policy, not because the models are bad. So
Absolutely.
you have to basically figure out where things are going wrong. So AI observability is the key piece if you are trying to take these large 0 to 1 products, these new LLM applications out into large scale production scenarios, so that you can basically scale back from the metric down to the data and figure out this stitch story and figure out where it's going wrong so that you can turn the right knob to land where you want to land.
Yeah, yeah. Keep hearing evals as being such an important part of evaluating how your applications are doing in production. I mean, similar to the role that QA has traditionally played a part in traditional software. On a tactical basis, Anu, for especially given Flipkart scale, who manages evals for your products? Like, is it the traditional QA or is it, combination of your ML team and software engineering team? And how dynamic is the
To be
whole?
very honest, we are still very old school and we go with ops. So we have a large team of ops, and there's a reason why we do that, right? So you have to understand Flipkart is very different. We operate on 11 vernacular languages. So there's not only just the intent understanding space complexity, there's also this machine translation, speech to text, text to speech, language translation problem spaces that you're dealing with. So LLMs today do not do as well out of the box, or even if we are training SLMs and LLMs on in-house, it does a good job, tracking in one language. The moment you start doing context switches, on language switches, it kind of starts losing the context a little bit. So it's very important to basically get the ops, the human in the loop, right, in there. So yes, you can use your GPT-4 or anything to start creating synthetic data and your evaluations prompts. But it's very important to get those evaluated with humans. We still are not there. We still haven't achieved AGI. So humans are our still best bet. And we are still very old school. We try to get our ops evaluated anytime a new model, try to create that gold set test data, as we used to call it, right? It's still there. We take the augmentation from the LLMs to even create the synthetic data or the evals. But at the end of the day, we have humans who are basically, overviewing these eval scenarios until it stabilizes. But what happens is once we have created this goal set standard and we keep on updating them in a quarterly manner or in a monthly manner, depending on the sensitivity of the use case, right? It drastically reduces the time needed for the humans to basically, expedite on that task. So it's basically essentially making humans more efficient, even in the labeling task, data generation, labeling task. And that is still the key, I would say, in the evals. Traditional QAs are also getting replaced through LLMs, but we still have QA specialists, who have to basically go in customer support. We have entirely automated the QA. What it has enabled us to do, we would only do monthly 1,000 calls evals. Now we can do all call evals. But at the end of the day, it's basically the humans who are checking if all the filters were basically checking the analysis report, how we are doing, where it's going wrong, what is not working, and what needs to be changed.
Awesome. And Samir, you mentioned earlier in this conversation that one of the challenges or things which you were surprised about is how unique the different brands are in terms of their expectations on brand voice and things like that. So could you, based on your learnings, comment on evals and how you think about it at Spiffy?
Yeah, definitely. And lots of great points made by Anu there that, align with how we are approaching the market as well. So yeah, I think the issue that we faced was that each merchant had these very specific needs. And, you can take models from OpenAI and Anthropic, and you can sort of try to put as much information as you can into the prompts and sort of make it really, really long. I know people who had several pages of prompts that were being sent to these models in order to get something that they felt comfortable putting in front of users. And of course, when you do things like that, the issue of latency and all of those things obviously come in. So when we started working with these merchants, we were like, okay, let's have an initial version where we are just playing around with the prompting model, and slowly realized that it was way too slow. It was way too expensive because these are the biggest models possible. And it wasn't consistently sort of reacting to what was in the prompt because, hey, there's several pages of things that it has to take into account with every response, and it can't always pay attention to all of it, right? Literally, I guess, when you're talking about attention networks. And so I think the goal that we had was to get rid of that several pages of context that's just providing, hey, the context of what the e-commerce or what that merchant is, and replace that with information that is actually useful and pertinent to the specific query that the user is making. And that allows us to have a model that's a lot more focused at, looking at the right parts of the prompt and having an experience, but an experience that's consistently good for that specific merchant and low latency. Like, we can control the whole experience, and target is sub-second response start. That is one of the core things that we are always measuring to make sure the users aren't waiting for more than a second to start seeing something. And that's something we've been excited to achieve. But when it comes to evaluation, we started, like Anu pointed out, we started with GPT-O wasn't out yet, but GPT-4 and stuff like that, to see like, hey, how good is it at pretending to be a consumer and then having a conversation? And it was, as these things tend to be, on initial look, it looked pretty good. When you start actually trying to use it as an evaluation framework, we realize that it's not actually that good. And thinking about where these models, I mean, we can only guess what they're trained on, but they're probably not trained on too much data of users telling them why they are purchasing something and going on a user journey. Like having a sales agent that is AI based and it's a new product that's coming to market. There is not existing data. So OpenAI and Anthropic doesn't have realistic data for what consumers go through in a shopping journey. And so these models can try to pretend what something like that would look like, but it's really, really pushing what they've been trained on. And these models tend to go back to a zone which they're comfortable in. And so the responses were too formal, the responses were not realistic. And yeah, so we do rely a lot on simulations and very detailed simulations, but it only took us so far. And so we had to build out this whole framework of both ingesting actual chats as they're coming in and making them part of the evaluation, and also training a model on these conversations to have a better model for how a user behaves on e-commerce websites and what they chat about while they are sort of navigating the pages. And yeah, so early days for sort of building out that capability, but as we get more and more data, we can imagine having a much more accurate model for a user's journey on e-commerce than OpenAI or Anthropic could potentially do. And the most useful thing for that is evaluation.
I was just thinking, Samir, as you were saying that you think most likely companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, they've not trained their models on consumer behavior data. I was thinking, thank goodness for that. So we have opportunities for startups like Spiffy, and investors like us can invest in things outside of OpenAI and Anthropic. Yeah. One of the things I'm curious about, since you, so to speak, have the mic here, Samir, having clean data has always been important. Clean data for user preferences, interests, their observed behavior, which obviously is not something that some of these large language models have been trained on. Having them available also for product descriptions and having them all be properly tagged has been important for personalization. In the customers that you engage with LLMs coming into the mix, has that anyway changed? As in, have you had to go into a customer engagement, looking at their data and realizing, oh my goodness, this is not sufficient for what we have to do or what we like to do? Or has it been the other way around where, keep hearing about LLMs being, we can use it obviously for zero shot and one shot ways, and also where LLMs can be used for also for labeling. So I'm also wondering if the opposite is true, which is that the data has to be, not as clean as it used to be in the past. So which of these things have you seen in your customer engagements?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I have perspectives on both sides. In fact, like I have a sort of way we are approaching it, both for a success story for LLMs and maybe that we need to rethink how to sort of process this data in the context of LLMs as being part of the product. So in terms of success, yes, we don't do much data cleaning as far as traditional methods are concerned. We ingest the catalog and let the LLM sort of take what it can from it. And once we have sort of multimodal models in there as well, it would be taking in the images as well. I think the models are a lot more robust at this. We also have a structured version of sort of what that data should look like. But, every merchant has their own different schema. And LLMs are also very good at taking product catalogs with merchant defined metadata fields and things like that, and sort of consolidating it into a unified schema with a little bit of sort of manual collaboration, I would say, or nudging. But for the most part, the data cleaning stuff, we don't spend too many cycles on that. It's a lot more with what you do with the data rather than cleaning it. On the other hand, the thing that we are building solutions for is this problem of understanding exactly why conversions happen, right? This is a thing that is, of course, one of the most important issues to understand for e-commerce, where the user, hey, went to this product landing page and then went to this PDP and then pressed back and then went to this other product, but then ended up buying the first product they were looking at. Like, what might have caused that, right? That's a very essential problem to e-commerce. And now with LLMs thrown into the mix, where sometimes LLM is answering a question or is suggesting a product and it's doing all of these things, the question then becomes, well, if a conversion takes place, how much can you credit the LLM or blame the LLM if it doesn't become a conversion, right? And so that signal has been noisy, but there are key insights there sometimes as well. Because we are building these models specific to our merchants, we can use that merchant data to even improve the LLM model to say, okay, LLM had this certain response and it led to a conversion. Maybe if we can figure out exactly why the conversion happened, we can update the model to say like more responses of those kinds are helpful to the users because they seem to be engaging. Whereas another response that you made led the user to completely bounce out of the experience. And that could be maybe a negative signal. And the trouble here is, of course, that this can be noisy. The reason they bounced out was, hey, maybe their husband was calling them over and they said, okay, I should close this tab, or they were at work or something like that, right? Like it may not be LLM's problem, or maybe they didn't have the right product in the catalog. And so separating the signal from the noise automatically and finding ways to train these LLMs to get better at helping the users is a really challenging problem that covers both e-commerce space and machine learning research and tries to sort of put those things together.
That makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like from what you said, in terms of the importance of having clean data, it looks like maybe it's less pertinent now with LLMs that are being deployed in different stages of bridging the supply and demand, as Anu put it. But at the same time, there are challenges in terms of leveraging the data that we collect eventually from customer behavior and then attributing it to the process that we went through internally. And on that, Anu, I mean, you've implemented a broad set of use cases yourselves using LLMs at Flipkart. What has your experience been in terms of the role of having clean data? I mean, the whole data engineering process, as we know it, it's been, at least in traditional AI, super important, having those pipelines and cleaning it and all of that. Have you had to do more of it, less of it, about the same? Like, where have you trended in Flipkart around that?
I would say it's very different for Flipkart, right? You have to understand the marketplace owners are not primary English speakers. So when they come and list products, the product descriptions are not rich at all. So our catalog suffers from being a very noisy, inaccurate catalog. And you can imagine having all the legacy descriptions on top of that, new things coming in. So one of the first things which we had to figure out is how to auto enrich the catalog, how to basically take more information from images, how to enhance images which they are uploading. These are people who are sitting down in a very dark room trying to take pictures and upload data into marketplace from various different small towns. And the internet connection might be bad, the quality of the image is bad. So how to physically use VLMs to enhance images, right? How to basically use VLMs to get more rich product description out of it. How to basically kind of create a RPD, a rich product description, which is basically focused on the features to differentiate it from one place to the other. So it's very different from a brand to a non-brand in marketplace. Brands can do photo shoots, brands can create a very, very rich marketplace for you. But as you're basically going to places where there are non-brands, where there is generic marketplace, LLMs has a lot of role to play in that. In fact, if we are not using LLMs to enhance the descriptions, there's almost nothing you can get out of it. There's so few reviews for the millions of lifestyle products that we have. We have lots of global reviews, which we can curate on electronics, on mobile, large and electronics, right? But there's so few you can do, which is basically a sari, which is a $2 sari, which is the largest volumetric thing which Flipkart sells. There's almost no reviews there, right? And how do you justify using LLM for the largest selling product in Flipkart? Do we then say that, hey, we are going to give only LLM applications on pricing based product? Do we make the consumer suffer for that? I don't know. It's a still unsolved answer whether these kind of applications could only come for cohort-based solutions or pricing-based solutions where it makes most ROI sense. At least at this point of time, we're applying it on all products and trying to figure out where it makes most business sense and consumer sense to basically help them out in a manner where they want to use. Flipkart has a separate fashion brand called Myntra. We have seen that's basically our high pricing market. It's a pricing markup based market, which we basically follow, right? So we have seen amazing results coming out of it through LLM applications, not so much in generic Flipkart e-commerce. If you are going down to the shoes and the saris, the $2 stuff which we are selling, trying to make the machine translations model, the speech to text, translations there have been more effective, right? So trying to remove the search barrier, the conversation barrier in those spaces have been more effective in landing them in those spaces. So it's very different applications and very different depending on what kind of things people are trying to look for in this entire thing. So it's not, let's say, one solution fits all. So it's data is very important, but how you basically use technology to cater that data out to your consumers varies from different cohorts, different products to different use cases.
This is very fascinating. I mean, and it's a great nuance, but important difference that you pointed out between applying a product like Spiffy to brands, which obviously have the incentive to have like at least beautiful images, perhaps even good product descriptions, versus what happens in a marketplace like Flipkart. And the difference in terms of what you need to do with your data in order to leverage LLMs for these applications. And it sounds like the more someone wants to use, whether it be visual models, multimodal models, and others, it is actually beneficial to have that data be as rich as possible so that it is consumable and actionable for the LLMs, even if it may
Absolutely.
not be so much so for the users. That's really fascinating. Switching topics here, we're getting to the very end. And this is a topic that it seems like it's been something that's been discussed for quite some time now, at least the past year and a half. There have been techniques like RAG that is being used in very context specific domains, or be it specific customer proprietary data context. There's also the aspect of fine tuning models, domain specific models. There's all these discussions that are being used. And Samir, I know you started mentioning how at least Spiffy's approach has been every customer is different. And it looks like there's this leaning towards getting these models hyper personalized. How do you see this trending? Like, what are your views on the pros and cons of some of the different approaches here? So, to ground us here a little bit, Anu was mentioning how, like, some of the dimensions here, the trade offs that they're thinking of between cost, latency, and accuracy. Obviously, with small models, you have to make some of these trade offs along cost. If you want to get hyper personalized, would a more RAG based approach make sense? Or is it, a combination of like some RAG, some small models, or is it fine tuning? What's your take on this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the way to think about this is like what OpenAI started and what everybody else is doing is creating an abstraction that allows LLMs to reach as many people as possible. And so what they decided was like, hey, they're going to train it. They're not going to make weights available. They're going to make this interface of give it an input and you only get text as the output. And that's really nice because it's a very simple API to work with. You can build a lot of things. But on the sort of other side of this whole technology, like looking at how it's been developing and how these things are actually what they're capable of, as an AI researcher, you realize that you can do a lot with these models that these APIs don't let you do, right? And so when it comes to RAG, for example, you're putting some important things in the context. Well, when OpenAI sort of released GPT-4 models, that's all you could do, right? So a lot of research went into what is the most we can get out of that. And then when fine-tuning support came out and when open source language models came out as well, there was some infrastructure for doing fine-tuning. And then the question was, okay, should we fine-tune a model or compare it to OpenAI RAG style stuff that you can do there? And ultimately, to me, those are not really sort of competitive methods. They're competitive sort of artificially so because of how the APIs and pricing and stuff like that has been structured. But when we have those models in-house, the way we are building it, we never ask, hey, should we do fine-tuning or RAG or RLHF or continued pre-training? There's so many approaches out there. Well, all of them have strengths and all of them have weaknesses. And you just have to put them together in a way that the strengths persist and the weaknesses don't, right? And so if someone says like, hey, when you fine tune a model, it tends to hallucinate more, that's only true because of the way we are fine tuning it and the way we are using them, right? If you use RAG, you have to give really long context. Well, that's because you're using RAG for a model that's trained to do as general purpose of a task as possible. And so, yeah, things like that happen. And so I think what we're building is with the right combination of like, okay, let's only put in the relevant information, but train the model itself to understand the use case and understand the merchant to the degree that it doesn't need the rest of the context, and train it not to hallucinate by giving it exact instruction on what it should output based on the input rather than try to be helpful, for example, which is one of the goals for OpenAI. And when you're creating a helpful AI agent, it's so trying to please you that it ends up hallucinating, right? And so to me, technically, every method has advantages and disadvantages, and you just have to put them together in ways that make sense for the product that you're trying to build.
That makes a lot of sense, Samir. I know we have just a few minutes remaining here, so let's switch into a rapid fire true false, starting with you, Anu. And, I'm going to say a statement. Please feel free to say true or false, and feel free to provide a short rationale, if you will. So the statement for you, Anu, is the biggest bottleneck for personalized e-commerce in the near term will be GPUs.
Well, I think it's false. At least for Flipkart, it is false for sure. Taking some of the context from the previous question, right? I do believe it will be very, very task-specific fine-tuning, which people will be focusing on rather than building a domain-specific foundational model, at least in e-commerce, because the domain is really large, especially for a company like Flipkart. And the data is ever-changing. Catalog is ever-changing. Every day, our catalog changes by tens and thousands of products. It's just not cost efficient to basically keep building such domain-specific foundational model for us. Whereas, task-specific fine-tuning, RAG-based approaches and combination of SLMs and LLMs are the places where we will go. And as open source models become more and more powerful and the SLMs becomes more and more powerful, I do not believe GPUs would be the largest bottleneck. Data might be, but GPUs might not be the largest bottleneck in the near term.
All right. Samir, for you, small models for personalized e-commerce is going to become ubiquitous in 2025.
I would, as much as I would want that to happen, I would say false for that, just because I think the technical infrastructure required to get there, you need machine learning expertise, you need enough time spent with LLMs, and I don't think there's enough of a workforce yet that has developed those sort of skill sets. So I think this is ultimately going to be the case, but just because of the technical know-how and the infrastructure needed, I think if you have a company that has that, you can build it out, but it's not going to be that easy to build out.
All right, this is getting spicier. Anu, for you, enterprises will prioritize building homegrown Gen AI applications in the coming future, like say next year, over buying off-the-shelf packaged apps.
Because we are talking about enterprises, I think yes, enterprises are already doing that. They are trying to home grow, even if they are basically going with off-the-shelf packaged apps to begin with. The final goal always for enterprise has been how to internalize these models. That's basically the way they can justify the ROI ever, right? So enterprises will always prioritize homegrown Gen AI applications. That's the trend which I've seen forever growing and has always been the case. So I would say that's true.
Awesome. At least one true of the three that we've talked about so far. Okay, final one for you, Samir. E-commerce experiences will change significantly in the coming years.
Oh, this is absolutely true. I think we're going through this stage where eager for my daughter to grow up and start shopping herself and then show her some screenshots of what e-commerce experience is like right now. And it's going to be really amusing to say, like, what? You had one single product description that was shown to all the users? That just doesn't make sense at all. Or why is this website like so bland and not sort of specific to me? So yeah, I think it's going to change a lot. I think a lot more of what the in-store retail experience that people do like will make its way to the digital web storefronts, just because we have the technology now to sort of start coming a little bit closer to what people like about in-store experiences. So yeah, I think definitely it will change significantly.
Awesome. Well, this was an incredible conversation, Anu and Samir. I think you both coming from two different ends of the spectrum here. And as far as e-commerce is concerned, I also felt like, you were offering a little bit different takes on different topics. Really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Vidya, and thanks, Samir.
Thank you, Vidya. This was a great conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Enterprise GTM Podcast. Subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on your favorite podcast platform so we can continue to help enterprise founders thrive.